and welcome to this Future Tech virtual roundtable from Foodservice Consultant Society International, FCSI. Today we're focusing on designing commercial kitchens and operating food service spaces in the educational sector. I'm Michael Jones from Progressive Content, Editorial Director of FCSI's Foodservice Consultant magazine. This roundtable is very kindly supported by Welbilt Inc., thanks to them, and we'll explore the challenges, the changes and the opportunities for K-12, colleges, universities and higher education spaces. I'm delighted to be joined by two leading FCSI professional member consultants and the Director of Product Management and Customer Service for Delfield at Welbilt Inc. So firstly, let me ask each participant to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their organisation and their area of expertise. Costel, can we start with you first, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. Costel Coca. I am one of the principals and really the lead planner and strategist here at Webb. So I specifically don't call myself a designer. I think Richard is an amazing designer, way better than me. But one of the things that I what I do with my team is I lead the planning process. And that's something I've come to really enjoy, specifically in education, both at the K-12 level and higher education as well. And so that's my level of expertise. So somehow I've been in this industry for 23 years, the last 10 or so leading the organization. And so it's been a fun and amazing ride so far.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Costel. Thank you for that. Richard, please.
Well, thank you, Costel. I appreciate those kind words. My name is Richard Dieli. I'm a food service design consultant, Dieli, Murawka, Howe. We've been around for almost 50 years now, in different iterations, but about 50 years. Our wheelhouse are K-12 and healthcare. That's really our wheelhouse of work. And we've been focusing on that for, as I said, close to 50 years. And we feel that we have a really good handle on it. One of the complexities as a design consultant is that food service has changed. It used to be you go in and you design a space. Now it's so much more layered than that. You just can't go in and design a space. You're being asked to stretch your abilities as a designer to understand what the concept of food service is beyond putting a fryer next to a grill, next to a broiler. So we're really being pushed a lot further on that. And as so, we have to grow in our development as designers and consultants.
Outstanding. Thank you, Richard. Go on.
Oh, no, I was going to say, then that should wrap it up for me. I'm done.
All done. And Marcy, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Marcy Mathews. I am the Director of Product Management and Customer Service here at Delfield, a Welbilt brand. I have been with the company for about 19 years, and a big portion of that time I have spent with K-12 food service directors and helping them find the best solutions for their operations. So I have a very strong passion for this segment and looking forward to talking a little bit further in detail.
Excellent. Welcome. Thank you very much, Marcy. Let's go back around the table again, the virtual table. And just for some context, can you set the scene for us, each of you, and just describe some of the main changes, the main challenges your educational sector food service clients have had to endure over the past couple of years and how they've adapted in order to successfully emerge out of the pandemic. So Richard, can we start with you first, please?
Yeah, so K-12 is a very slow evolving process. The food service is very slow. If we go back to, especially in a desired real estate area. So when you're in California, New York, any of the places that have a very high dollar value to the land, the school is forced to get smaller. So the footprint becomes smaller. So over the evolving of the kitchen space itself, we've seen that in the 60s, the kitchen went from a full-blown production space. Now it's shrunk down to where you may have a kitchen that's 200-300 square feet.
Right.
So at the time, you may have said, hey, we're going to feed in a school. We might feed 200-300 students. Well, today, because we have universal feeding, you go into a high school, we could be serving 10,000 meals a day.
Goodness me.
So we now have forced to look at not only the concept of how we're serving food, but we now have to receive it. We have to be able to dish it up. So our physical plant is stressed, incredibly so. Forget the labor issue, but let's just talk about refrigeration, dry storage, dish up space. Plus, we have the impacts on with environmental health. We can't serve the way we did in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. They're putting more and more stress on the school itself and child nutrition services. You must adhere to rigid guidelines. So the status quo is being hugely impacted. And if I'm a little bit wordy here, too bad. So what we are now forced to look at, what the directors are coming to, people like Costel and myself, they're coming and saying, what do we do? And so we're now being forced to look at it creatively, looking at how this process is going to work. And if we are now being forced to go to manufacturers also and say, you guys got to get creative in how you're looking at the equipment you're designing. And
thank you, Richard. And Costel, same question to you. Are you experiencing the same sort of challenges? Are there others out there?
Yeah, no, I think Richard is like spot on. I think one of the things that when we look at school districts, we're looking at this sort of from a ecosystem perspective. So what's the school district as a whole? So even when you're doing an elementary school, you need to really understand what's the vision and what's the planning operations of the entire school district, so you can come to, a solution. And I completely agree. I think high schools are becoming the new commissaries in a sense, mini commissaries that serve other schools. And so we're seeing the spaces right now for high schools increasing and elementary schools being minimized. Middle schools are somewhere in between. And there's a challenge of, right sizing the operation and understanding growth. But I think ultimately demographics, especially here on the West Coast, are changing tremendously. So school districts that historically have had really high participation in number of students are decreasing. And then we're seeing sort of the outskirts, the suburban areas growing in places and dropping in others. And so our strategy does not fit, there's no same strategy for every school district. It's really dependent on their anticipation for growth. And so it's interesting. We're just working with the school district recently, and they were 5 years ago, they were expecting this massive growth in housing. Well, that whole area now has become a commercial distribution area. And so there's commercial buildings popping up everywhere. And so their strategy is changing as far as their growth perspective. So it's interesting. It's just there's constant change. And I think ultimately we need to look at districts from a master planning perspective, whether they have one, or we need to speak towards developing a master plan for their district eventually.
Excellent. Thanks, Costel. Marcy, what sort of challenges are you experiencing via your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. And I everything that has been said is, what we're seeing. And, I think the point that not one strategy is going to work for everyone is certainly what we're seeing, and the ability for flexibility and the ability to have a solution. When the directors, when the consultants are coming to us with these challenges, how do we overcome that with a solution within the serving system? And a lot of that comes through the ability to be flexible and to help with staffing concerns. Do we make our equipment very intuitive and very easy to use? Maybe that piece of equipment is also connected so that you're reducing some of those staffing concerns. So I think that between the supply chain crisis, staffing concerns, all of those factors that are coming into food service, a lot of those things we have to overcome with really the ability to innovate and be very flexible. I think we're going to hear the word flexibility come up quite a bit in today's conversation, but that agility to shift, pivot, and change direction is more important now than ever.
Love that. Thanks very much, Marcy. Richard, you mentioned some of the different kind of projects that your organization takes on. Can you just outline some of the different challenges that, say, a K-12 food service operation might experience compared to a college or a higher education or a university? How much crossover or similarity is there when you're at the planning stage or the design stage? Or is this really comparing apples and oranges, completely different things?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing about K-12 versus higher ed work is that K-12 work is required to follow the concepts, the mandates of USDA and the local state education programs. So we are guided by those mandates that'll talk about the caloric intake, the amount of fat you can have, the amount of sodium. All those things are required within the program. Now, we may approach let's say a high school the same way, with different design platforms for the student to queue up to. But the reality is, it's really the dietary restrictions placed on the school itself. The other important thing is the time frame. In a school, for example, we have a district where we were required to serve 4,000 students in one 30-minute lunch period. Well, good luck.
Yeah.
You will never run that into higher ed. It just doesn't happen. And in higher ed, you're allowed to go outside the cafeteria zone. So you could have 6, 8, 10 different venues in a higher ed program. Whereas a school, we may have the cafeteria, and we have what we call campus cruisers, or some satellite programs that are very minimal. But we're restricted once again on our menu options, and we're restricted in the time zone. So these are critical components to what we deal with in the difference between K-12 and higher ed. So the other important thing here is we look at the inertia of a school program. Inertia to us is that when you have a program like a school, it goes on forever. It isn't going away. So the director may see the problem, but the inertia I got to put this fire out, I got to feed these students every day, pushes it out. One of the great things that happened about the pandemic, it became the mother of necessity here to solve the problem. So now that inertia has been slapped upside the head, and we now have to address it. So people like Costel and myself, we are now forced to look at, okay, what are the solutions? Now we have to get with people like Marcy, say, we got to come up with something more viable.
Great answer, Richard. Thank you. And Costel, let's bring you in there. Obviously, your expertise, as you mentioned, was the planning process. So how are you approaching these kind of projects differently? Do you engage stakeholders in a very different way, for example?
Yeah, and I think it's really doing a lot more programming work. I think that's where we've transitioned to. And so both at the higher education level and at the K-12 level is a lot more planning. So like, what's the demand, the capacity, what's the time frame that we have to feed students? I completely agree, Richard. Literally, that is one of the biggest fundamental differences between K-12 and higher education. It's just the amount of time, and that begins to limit what you can do. So, but we talk about the experience, the dining experience. We do want to mimic the higher education experience, and the higher education really mimics hospitality, or and so it's kind of there's a layer to it, and so one of the ways we've been looking at K-12 is the dispersal of food options, right? And I think, Richard, you were talking about that. Is we might have an area for sort of grab and go, an area as more of a traditional servery, but also, a kiosk outside, and maybe different areas to kind of pick up food and options. So I think that dispersal gives us the opportunity to serve more students, but also give them more options. And that's usually another challenge, is how can we give them more options, again, within those USDA requirements that we have to follow. So it's an interesting, there's a lot more constraints than opportunities. And so we just have to be a lot more creative. And then equipment can limit this as well, and so it's interesting. West Coast, we see a lot of serving lines, speed lines, less so on the other side of the country. And so it's an interesting, like, cultural thing that has happened, in our industry. And so, yeah, we can get the speed, but maybe the dining experience or that connection to the food is not there, and now that, we're still tracking, we still have to track, even though, like in California, everybody can get a free meal. But the time is one of the biggest constraints that we see right now.
Excellent. Thanks, Costel. Marcy, Costel mentioned the constraints, but also some of the opportunities available here. How can significant, big seismic challenges and impacts like we've experienced in the last couple of years, how can they sometimes unearth positive change as well? Can they make us rethink what we do? You mentioned words like pivot and shifting and flexibility. Has it actually helped us to do things differently, to be more flexible? Are there some benefits to what we've experienced in the last couple of years?
Absolutely. And I think about equipment, over the last even 10 years, and I think about how much equipment has changed in the world of flexibility and also sustainability. Both of those things have really been a big focus, I think, for a lot of manufacturers. And I know very specifically for Delfield, when we create a new piece of equipment now, or even within some of our current technologies, we're always thinking, how do we future-proof this so that it can do more than one thing? And so, I kind of think that mindset is ingrained in us a little more now than it ever has been, is that future-proof piece. How do we make this do something different? Or if we have to change it, how can that be changed? And that comes in the way of, using wells, hot and cold, using counter protectors, self-serve, full serve. There's multiple different examples of that within our product portfolio. But, I think that it's not anything that's like this big world-changing innovation that has changed throughout the pandemic. I think it's these small, pragmatic pieces that have really moved us forward in the way that we're thinking differently, and I think that everyone agrees that food service typically moves pretty slow. And in this case, I think that a lot of these little small things were able to happen fast. And I think that those small things have really changed how we'll look at the future going forward.
Great answer, Marcy. Richard, from the small pragmatic way of thinking that Marcy just mentioned to some of the, genuinely game-changing innovation, what have you seen? What initiatives have you seen that have made you kind of, I don't know, your clients have put into place? What surprised you? Kind of what have you seen that's impressed you?
Not in our industry. Food service probably the slowest, as Marcy's changed, as Marcy described. It's the slowest moving thing in technology. One is that the dollar volume. We may have a million operations, but every operation is so unique. So you go to a manufacturer and say, I want to do this. Manufacturer says, yeah, you could do it as long as we can get 500 of them on the production line. And that's one of the real problems we have. So technology itself will generally come from without. I believe technology comes from without. So we'll be looking at more what Allied does. If you went to the recent NRA show or any of the shows, you saw robotics. That's like 19th century telephones. We're looking at robotics that have no basis in reality of what we're doing. And we're still thinking of robotics as a replacement for labor versus as an implementation to facilitate labor. One of the things that we have in child nutrition services is that the food service is an extension of the home.
Yeah.
So there has to be that humanistic touch to it. We just can't set hamburgers on trays and have kids grab it and leave. That's not food service. So it's going to be seen as a pivotal point. It's not today, but it's seen as a pivotal point in the education process. Many studies have been done to show that without good nutrition, students don't learn well. And that's a critical component. So we still have to keep that humanistic touch. Technology is going to be there. As I said, I don't believe it's going to come from our industry. I believe it's going to come from without. We just don't have the dollars to support that research available to us. But it's going to see, we're going to see things like vertical farming. I believe that we will see vertical farming on a school campus. I believe we will redesign the way we see our classrooms, pivoting around critical components such as child nutrition services. These things are going to be in the future in design, and it's really important to understand where that planning is, as made mention, where that planning and programming process is going to occur. So I think that what Marcy was saying, these small incremental increases are fine, but they're not game changers to us. They're really not game changers.
Great answer. Thank you, Richard. Costel, same sort of question to you, really. What kind of incremental differences have you seen that's really sort of made a difference to your clients?
But it's interesting because I think what has happened is because of the pandemic and the need, everybody's a little more open towards innovation, and they know they need to be flexible and rethink what they've always held on to. And so I think people have been more open to looking at things, and so less so in K through 12, but in higher education is the whole idea around not just focusing on, everything is self-serve, but having opportunities for grab and go, for, food lockers and anything that's frictionless. That's been a big push. And so we're seeing technology implemented there, that doesn't necessarily have a home in K through 12 right now, maybe could be in the future. But this idea of ordering on your phone and picking food up, like we're doing it in workplace dining, it's almost on every project now. And so in higher education, we're seeing it. And when we do a market, every time we do, a residential dining facility, we're also probably going to do a market as well that has different options. And so I think people are open to looking at different models and variety in the way we serve.
Yeah,
I think that's a little bit slower at the K-12 level for sure, but I think it is coming. And I would agree, like robotics is not here today. There's some fun stuff, it's cool. Again, we do it in certain market segments, but it's not here where it's actually helping us, right? Because I'm still waiting for that, fully automated dish room. I'm still waiting for it because I'll put in every project. So when we can answer that and when it makes financial sense, that would be something super, that would help an operation, something that's practical. And I think we'll get there eventually, but it's going to take some time. And I do think it'll probably come outside of our industry and then kind of implement together. So we're seeing a shift that's not quite there for us to put it in projects that are still, we're not necessarily designing for 30 years, but we are designing the infrastructure for 30 years. And so we have to be really careful about how, we don't want to be on the bleeding edge. We want to be on the cutting edge. And so there is a difference there. So we have to be careful.
Great answer. Thanks, Costel. Marcy, let's bring you in there. One of the things you mentioned was about how equipment is able to do more now, that sort of multifunctionality element of equipment. How have you really seen that come to the fore in the last couple of years, and also what the kind of machines that you're working on that will be launched in the future?
Sure. So yeah, absolutely. The multifunction is really something that we're seeing more and more customers not only just have the desire to have, but really demand to have, because they know that now more so than ever that they have to have the ability to change their menu items if they need to. And that could just tie right back to supply chain. If they have something that they typically were able to get, and now they are only able to get a different piece of, another food item, then they need to be able to shift and use a different piece of equipment. That, that could be anything from a piece of cooking equipment to a piece of refrigerated equipment. So, really everything that we have been developing on the side of serving has all been with that in mind, so that we were really talking to our customers about how that piece can be used in multiple different functions. And a piece of that too that we sometimes lose sight of is the avenue to get that information to operators. Just that in itself is, can sometimes be a challenge to help operators understand exactly what it is that they have, and that although they've always used it in one way, now they have the option to use it in another way. And just that gap in education and helping customers understand exactly what it is that they have and how they can use it throughout the life of their equipment. A lot of times in this segment, you don't see a school get the funding to have new equipment very often. So they really need to think about the longevity as well as just the ability to be flexible. So it's built in, that flexibility builds in that longevity piece of it as well. So that years down the road, you can do something different with your equipment than you intend to do today.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And obviously that training and education piece is absolutely huge. Marcy, but also Costel, you've already picked up on the kind of the labour crisis and the ongoing issue and challenge that's creating to the industry. Richard, how do we fix that?
Labour? Well, you have really some real basic components in labor. Number one, do you have a workforce available? A lot of schools K-12 used to use students.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of areas that you can't do that anymore. Or they would use mothers who wanted to, earn a couple bucks. Well, the unions are pushing those out. So we have to have the available workforce. We have to be able to deal with the unions, and we have to have a program that will encourage people to work in a really low-paying position. These are real issues. If you look at the labor, we just had a conversation yesterday about doctors and architects and people that were highly skilled individuals, and they're leaving their industry. They're leaving. They're not coming back. Well, and we here are on the low end of this wage scale, and we can't get people back. So I don't know where all the employees are going, but they're gone, and there is no real easy solution to getting the labor issue resolved. There just isn't, and it isn't going to be through that. Although I would agree with you, Costel, if we could get a robotic warewashing area, that would be every designer's dream. Just get it in, but it isn't going to happen. It isn't going to happen, and I don't know. I don't think there's an easy solution. One other point I wanted to go back to what Marcy was talking about. Marcy, you're saying the dollars aren't there. The dollars are there now. The dollars are there with universal feeding. Universal feeding is across the country. So when we talk about you're not set up to handle universal feeding is a bigger component than the concept of dollars, because we could have a high school that was only producing for themselves 1,500 meals a day. They're now capable of doing 10,000. They have to do 10,000 meals a day. Well, you start getting that reimbursement, all of a sudden you're talking about, we have districts that have $12, $15 million over their reserves. The issue isn't always the reserves, what they have over the reserves. Does the district have the money to help them provide that? So you can get a piece of equipment, but if you can't get power to that equipment, you can't put the piece of equipment in. So those are the complexities of what we're dealing with. So I don't know if it's necessarily in every case where we don't have the dollars. It's more layered, it's more complex than that.
Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah. Costel, you mentioned that we're not quite at the stage where educational food service can invest in fully automated dish rooms. But what kind of, or what aspect of robotics or automation do you see actually making an impact in this sector? It's clearly not like QSR. It's not the same model. But do you see that there is capacity or room for it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's not really robotics, but like, I think we need to go to more semi-automation. And so I think the larger districts have an opportunity to do this through commissaries or high schools, where you're gaining efficiencies in your slicing and dicing of products, and you can do certain items in bulk. You know, I'm not talking about everything, but utilizing equipment, semi-automated equipment, where you still have a little bit of control, but and that could be even more automated, through robotics in the future. And so I think that's where we're going to see it, and that's where we're starting to see it first, is more on the commissary side. And I think then we need to look at smaller scale, how it trickles down. But ultimately, I think that's the opportunity for most districts. So looking at how they, how they do some of their specific processes that take up a lot of labor, and do you do it at one of the high schools, and do you take another space next to the main kitchen and expand so you can do some of those processes? And I think that's where that's really what we're seeing right now. There's some specific needs for that type of equipment, and I think that will help. So you're not, doing the same prep at 5 different sites or 10 sites. You're doing it at one site. You have some control, and you're doing it with a little bit less labor. So I think that's part of the strategy that we're seeing. I think a lot of robotics right now is forward facing, so it's customer facing. It's not necessarily focused on the production side, and I think I think that's where I believe manufacturers can play a role in helping us get there. And I agree. Like, there's combi ovens, there's like super smart, braise, tilt skillets, and so like there is stuff out there, and I think there could be more investment and focus on that, because that's where a lot of the labor will be.
Thank you, Costel. Marcy, we've heard you mentioned actually at the top about connected kitchens, and I just wonder what kind of role can they play in this sector? We hear a lot about them in hospitality, but cloud-based solutions, connected kitchens, how do they fit in with educational food service? What kind of part can they play?
Sure. And I think that so much of that depends on the school system. It depends on size, it depends on engagement, it depends on a lot of things. So, connected kitchens, are amazing for some of those operators that may have larger school districts, and they're going to manage across different, different locations. So I think it really depends. But I think that, when we're talking about all of these labor issues, if we can put a piece of connectivity that reduces the labor, maybe that reduces the need for tracking, so now you don't have someone that's continuously tracking food safety, because of course, food safety is always going to be very important. Connected kitchens can help you do that. Improving food quality overall, reducing consumables, those types of things are certainly all items that connected kitchens can help us to shift forward versus bounce back from the pandemic. I don't think that we'll ever get back to exactly what we did before pandemic, but connected kitchens certainly help us bounce forward to that next step.
Great stuff. Thank you, Marcy. Richard, how is something like Just Walk Out technology, JWO, what sort of changes is that able to bring to this sector?
I think that, first of all, Just Walk Out technology is, the algorithms on that are so complex, and it's still proprietary, I believe, to Amazon. I think they still have the proprietary rights on that, but they're so complex. And school food service is like 10 leagues behind technology as it comes forward. Child nutrition services is dependent on two issues. They're dependent on their IT staff, which is generally not the cutting edge staff, but it's rather the maintenance staff for IT. And secondarily, they're dependent on manufacturers. And as we've said, manufacturers are reactive in what they do. Typically, what they do is reactive. We do have some cutting edge manufacturers, but they're typically reactive to the marketplace. they're not innovative in their technology. I'm sorry, Marcy, but that's typically what we've seen in our manufacturers. They react to the market versus innovate in the market. The other thing that's really important is education. Marcy's touched on that. But we could have the greatest thing. How long did it take us to get a combi oven so it's acceptable in food service? I mean, you go into even today into districts in certain remote areas, you're saying, well, we need to get better food quality. A combi is a good way to provide that better food quality, especially on a retherm site. They're resistant, big time resistant to that. It's the technology still scares the heck out of them.
Costel, is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think the gap is proper training. And so when you have somebody coming in working for like 3 hours, getting them trained it requires an effort. And so, but I think part of what I'm just trying to think about how do we fix some of this labor issue? I think ultimately school districts need to look at the employee experience, right? Like, do they have the right kitchens? Are they working with the right equipment, or are they working with the equipment from 50 years ago? And so that's going to affect somebody they're going to hire. So something they didn't really have to think about before, it was just accepted, I think, ultimately, that experience. And so like, hey, you're coming here working with good equipment, and we're going to teach you and invest and train you. And so it's painful, but it's something that's probably going to be necessary to recruit employees. And so the experience, and then tying it around, really doing the work, for child nutrition. I mean, it's my wife is a teacher, so she's doing teaching because she loves teaching, and she believes in it. And so there's a lot of people that, if we're elevating the experience, around food and nutrition for students, I think there's a place for people to participate in that. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, how everything evolves. But I think there's a little bit of a shifting and the rethinking of the role of, child nutrition in schools.
Yeah, and I want to interrupt one thing, because I think it was a very valid point. The environment for child nutrition services, the kitchen itself, is a critical component to keeping people. You can walk into school kitchens that were built in the 60s, 70s, 80s. There's no air conditioning.
Huh.
And when you walk in and it's 100 degrees in there, that's all they're required to do is give them a hydration break. You can't work in that environment. We tell our architects, I want you to turn off your air conditioning in your office and see how you enjoy in there in the middle of summer. Well, that's what a school kitchen's like about 90% of the time.
Yeah.
So the environment has to get better also. Not only the equipment, but the environment has to get better.
And staying on the subject of the environment, but a slightly different aspect of the word environment, Marcy, let's look at sustainability. You brought that up right at the top. How has the pandemic and the last couple of years really, how has it made us reassess the subjects of sustainability, particularly in this sector? Are operators, are manufacturers, are consumers taking it a lot more seriously now? Did it have to go on the back burner the last couple of years? How do you see that sort of sustainability being prioritized in this sector?
Absolutely. And, I did mention it because it is something that really is always top of mind for us here at Delfield. And I'm not sure necessarily that the pandemic has shifted any of that mindset. I think it really started in about 17 when the DOE and EPA put many new regulations, or whether they were overturned or not. But a lot of that that mindset and narrative started to shift then. And so, I think that there has been, on the manufacturing side, there has been a lot more emphasis put on that because of all of all of those things that have been happening in government regulations. So back to pandemic, I don't necessarily think it's pandemic related, but I think that there really has been a big mindset shift in that, even just on the refrigeration side, for instance, we have all of our refrigeration products are all Green Genius, which is our R290 system, which across the board, we're seeing about a 15% energy reduction. So, all of the refrigeration products that we manufacture today are more energy efficient than they were even a couple of years ago. So I think it's something that the manufacturers are taking very seriously, and there's something that they're always thinking of. We certainly are at Delfield.
Thanks, Marcy. Costello, do you agree with that? Are you seeing sustainability being, is it part of the decision-making process for operators? Is it still secondary to the, costs? Where are you seeing it?
Yeah, so we get the opportunity to work in California. I don't know if it's an opportunity, but in California really is leading the push in from a code perspective. And so we're dealing with two significant issues. One of it is the electrification of the kitchen, which was unheard of in California. I mean, it wasn't even on our radar 10 years ago. It was just not something we were doing. And so that has fundamentally changed, and essentially where we're headed is all, public projects, which K-12 is a part of it. It's going to all electric. And so there's a difficulty with that because, again, training people to work on electric equipment. So, and then that ritual, right, of cooking with fire, is changing the way we're gonna display food, the flavor profiles. And so there's a huge shift. And so I tell all, anybody that's all manufacturers on the cook line side, if you don't have electric equipment right now, you're gonna be falling behind. So that's huge. The other part is refrigeration. And so really the goal is to get to a global warming potential of 0 on refrigerant. And so, we just worked on a central kitchen project that had CO2 refrigerant. It's not there yet on our end. You can't do a blast chiller with CO2 right now. And so, it's not there. It's there for supermarkets, but it's not quite there for us. And then the cost and complexity and maintenance of that you can't get service. And especially now, it's become a massive, headache. We push the envelope, but it's not, it needs to reach sort of critical, a critical point where there's a lot more support for those systems. So it's good for manufacturers to be pushing, but once manufacturers push together, then we really have change and impact. And so I think, again, the market's going to dictate that. I think California, that's being dictated really from a code compliance perspective. But those are the kind of two major items. The other one is also, the goal to 0 waste. Yeah. And so that impacts operation, impacts, how we serve food, how much we put out there, portion control, everything around that is impacted when we think about specifically food waste. And that is something that we're looking at as well, and that touches all sorts of equipment.
Excellent, thanks, Costel. One other, I guess, kind of key trend, Richard, that we've seen in the last couple of years, obviously, is a move towards plant-based diets. Are you seeing that increasingly with students as well? And what other kind of cuisine types are being impacted?
Okay, so yeah, we think that the concept of whether it's plant-based or a specific dietary requirement, we have, and I'm sure Costel has seen it also. When you do a hospital, you do a prison, and they specifically have areas. These kitchens are separate. So you'll have a halal kitchen, or you'll have a kitchen that specifically is set aside so we don't get that intermingling of utensils, kosher kitchen style, where it has to occur. Where if you have a plant-based product, it can't be in contact with the standard protein of a meat product. So we're going to see more and more. We're going to have separate areas within the kitchen that are dedicated to the plant-based product and to the religious or specific dietary requirements. It's really becoming tantamount in school education. Like I said, we've done it in healthcare. We've done it in, if you can believe it, in prisons, because you have a lot more issues in the prisons than you'd suspect. But in food service in at K-12 and higher ed, it's now being focused on. Okay. And you know, one of the things that Costel remarked about is the electrification of kitchens.
Yeah.
One of the problems we've had in California and places like that, our KW costs are so absurd here. During prime time, a KW could be 80 cents a KW. Whereas typically, if you go into the South, it might be 6 or 7 cents a KW. So we're being forced into this zero emission program, zero carbon program, but the cost, who's going to absorb that cost? And the other thing that happens by the way, in zero carbon is it's like a HACCP program for equipment. Now we're going to have to ask the manufacturers, how did you build this piece of equipment? Because now we're bringing in something that we cannot add carbon to the environment because you built something that was the antithesis of what we asked for. So this is going to be another issue that we have to, just because it's zero emission on the end, it doesn't mean it was zero emission on the front side.
Yeah, it's a great point. A final question for the three of you, please. Again, if we just go around the table, can you just give me maybe a minute on what you think will be the most exciting or the most pivotal type of innovation or indeed trend in this sector, in educational food service, for the rest of the decade? What's going to really sort of blaze a trail here? Richard, can we stay with you first, please?
Okay, what I think we're going to see of that collective that I talked about, that where we're going to start doing almost like a vertical farming concept within the school district programs. That we are no longer going to, if we're going to do produce, we're going to grow the produce. We're going to have control over what we do. I see more and more integrated production on the campus. There's no reason why we can't build. If we can build a football field, why can't we build a farm? And that's really what I see. I see that's going to be an integrated process within food service.
Love that. Thanks, Richard. And Costel, please.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to see specifically at the K-12 level, not necessarily in innovation, but I think we're going to see, again, the role of nutrition and food service have a higher importance. And I think out of that will come, the way some of the restrictions around USDA, I think those will start to change. And I think they'll start to mimic the higher education experience. And I think we're headed towards there. And ultimately for me, I think it's like, how do we leverage? So I love that all manufacturers have data, content, but what do we do with all this information? So I think, finding ways to take all this data and information around equipment, specifically around how we do maintenance and developing programs. So we really think about a piece of equipment that has a full life cycle. When is that? Because part of what we're working with clients right now is like with school districts, they have all this equipment. So we have to go in and do inventory for them just to track their equipment. They have no idea what they have in all their schools. They have no idea what their life cycle is. And so like you talk about waste, you talk about, not just money, but like waste in equipment. And how do we actually start tracking equipment from the beginning all the way to its life cycle and help clients beyond just finishing the design process? But and I think the data and information is there, but how do we pull it together? If I only had some more time, I could come up with something. But but so yeah, that's kind of what interests me, because I think this idea of just-in-time manufacturing model is kind of falling on its face right now. And so, you just don't just order a piece of equipment, and that's not going to change tomorrow. And so I think our relationship with the equipment is going to change. The importance of a piece of equipment and its life cycle is going to change. And the impact that it has on the environment and the impact that it has on labor, maintenance. So I don't know. I wish I had a word for that, all that to encapsulate it, but there's something of brewing there.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Costel. And finally to you, please, Marcy.
Yeah, so Costel said it best, and that my favorite saying that has come out of this today is our relationship with our equipment. And, so I think it's that relationship with the equipment for me, and I didn't have the right words for it, but those are definitely it. And, I think that's, how do we have the best life cycle management for it? Is that through connected kitchens? Certainly could be a part of it. How do we improve first time fixes? How do we, invest in the technologies that help save labor and increase flexibility and improve food quality? I think that those all come with that relationship with a piece of equipment. And I think that, the short-term answer to that is likely through connected kitchens. And, and I think that starts that journey throughout that whole piece of that relationship.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marcy. That is, I think, a great place to conclude upon. That was a really fun and insightful debate for some great speakers. Marcy, Costel and Richard, huge thanks for joining us today. I'd like to thank Welbilt for their support. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned to fcsi.org for future events. Thank you.